An arrogant CEO fired his janitor in front of everyone, calling him useless. But what he didn't know was that this janitor was hiding a shocking secret. Within hours, the tables turned, and the CEO was left speechless. You won't believe what happened next. "You're fired! Get out of my building right now!" Those harsh words echoed through the massive corporate headquarters, freezing the air. Employees stopped what they were doing, wide-eyed and whispering nervously. "Did the CEO just fire the janitor?" Someone muttered under their breath. The CEO's name was Richard Collins, a man whose name alone carried fear in the office. He was tall, sharply dressed, and carried himself with an arrogance that could be felt from a mile away. Everyone knew Richard's rules. Don't question him, don't waste his time, and most importantly, don't make mistakes. To Richard, success was measured in dollars and status. He believed the world was divided into two types of people: winners, like himself, and the rest, the ones he considered beneath him. And unfortunately, Richard had just directed all of that arrogance at the most unexpected target: the janitor. The man he fired was James. An elderly janitor in his 60s, James had worked in the company for more than 20 years. His job wasn't glamorous, but he carried himself with quiet pride. He arrived before sunrise, often the first in the building, and cleaned every corner with patience and care. He made sure the floors gleamed, the trash bins were empty, and the offices looked spotless before the employees walked in. To most people, James was invisible, just another janitor pushing a mop. But for those who took the time to notice, James was much more. He was always ready with a kind word, always respectful, and always treated everyone with dignity, no matter their position. On this particular morning, Richard had stormed into the office in a foul mood. He was preparing for one of the biggest meetings of his career, a gathering with wealthy investors who could decide the company's future. Everything had to be perfect, or so he thought. As Richard walked briskly down the hallway, he noticed James wiping a small coffee spill on the carpet. Instead of recognizing James's effort, Richard's face twisted with irritation. "Do you call this clean?" Richard snapped, his voice booming through the hall. "Look at this mess. You're a waste of company money. Pack your things. You're fired." Gasps filled the air. Employees exchanged stunned looks, their hearts racing. Nobody dared to speak up. Nobody ever challenged Richard. James slowly looked up, his eyes calm, yet filled with quiet dignity. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply nodded and said softly, "If that's what you wish, sir." Then, with his mop still in hand, he walked away, leaving behind a hallway full of uneasy employees. But what Richard didn't know, what nobody in that office knew, was that James wasn't just an ordinary janitor. Beneath his humble uniform was a truth so shocking it would shake the entire company and bring Richard's empire crashing down. The morning passed quickly, and the time for the big investor meeting finally arrived. Richard, full of confidence, stood at the head of the boardroom table, rehearsing the speech he had prepared. He imagined the applause, the handshakes, and the deals that would secure his power for years to come. The double doors of the boardroom opened, and a group of wealthy investors walked in. Richard straightened his suit, ready to greet them. But, as he looked toward the front of the group, his smile froze. Leading the investors was none other than James, the very janitor he had fired just hours earlier. Except now, James wasn't wearing his uniform. He wore a tailored suit, a polished watch on his wrist, and an air of authority that made even the most powerful executive stand straighter. Richard blinked, his mouth opening slightly. You're the janitor. What are you doing here?" James's calm smile never wavered. "Correction, Mr. Collins, I was your janitor. But I am also James Harrington, the majority shareholder of this company." The room went silent. Investors looked stunned. Employees peeking through the glass walls covered their mouths in shock. Richard staggered, unable to process what he had just heard. You own the company? James nodded. That's right. For years, I chose to work here, not as a shareholder, but as a janitor. I wanted to see this company through the eyes of the people at the bottom, not the top. I wanted to understand how employees were treated, because how a company treats its lowest paid worker tells the truth about its leadership. He paused, his calm voice cutting through the tension like a knife. And today, Mr. Collins, you showed your true colors. Richard tried to stammer out an excuse. I didn't mean if I had known, but James raised his hand firmly. That's exactly the point. You didn't care to know. You judged me by my job, not by my worth. Leadership isn't about money or power. It's about respect, humility, and integrity. The investors nodded in agreement. One of them spoke up. Mr. Harrington, we support your vision. This company deserves a leader like you, not someone blinded by arrogance. James turned toward Richard. His tone was calm, but his words cut deep. Richard Collins, as of today, you are relieved of your duties as CEO. Consider this your last day in this company. Applause filled the boardroom. Outside, employees who had been quietly listening erupted in cheers. The arrogant CEO who once thought himself untouchable was now powerless, standing humiliated before the very people he once looked down on. James then addressed the staff. Let this be a lesson for all of us. Never underestimate anyone. Every person's role matters, whether you're a janitor, a secretary, or a CEO. Respect is the true foundation of success. From that day forward, under James's leadership, the company flourished. Employees felt valued and motivated, knowing their voices mattered. And as for Richard, he disappeared from the corporate world, remembered not for his wealth, but for the day he was humbled by the man he once called just a janitor. Later that afternoon, Richard Collins sat confidently at the head of the polished mahogany boardroom table. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bouncing off the skyscrapers outside. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, wearing the smug smile of a man who believed he had everything under control. This was the meeting that could define his legacy, the arrival of wealthy investors who would decide whether to expand his company or walk away. To Richard, it was more than a meeting. It was validation of his superiority, proof that his cutthroat methods worked. He had no idea, however, that fate had already prepared a twist that would shatter his arrogance. The tall double doors creaked, open, and a hush fell over the room. In walked a group of sharply dressed men and women, their suits tailored, their presence commanding respect. Richard rose to greet them with his usual forced charm. But then his eyes landed on the man leading the group. Richard's jaw dropped, his smile vanished. His breath caught in his throat. At the head of the group was none other than James, the very janitor Richard had fired just hours earlier. But James wasn't in his faded uniform or carrying a mop this time. He wore a tailored navy suit, polished, shoes, and a gold watch that gleamed under the light. His calm, commanding presence filled the room in a way Richard never could. You're the janitor," Richard stammered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" James smiled, a calmness in his eyes that made the silence even heavier. "Correction, Mr. Collins. I was your janitor. But in truth, I am James Harrington, the majority shareholder of this company." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. The investors straightened in their chairs, some raising their eyebrows in disbelief. Employees peering through the glass. Windows outside gasped, covering their mouths with their hands. And Richard, his face drained of color. The man he had humiliated, the man he thought worthless, was actually the one who had the most power in the building. James stepped forward, his voice steady yet firm. "For years, I chose to work quietly in this building, not as an investor, not as a shareholder, but as a janitor. I wanted to see the truth. I wanted to know how this company operated at the ground level, how employees were treated. Not in staged meetings, but in real life, in the hallways, in the small interactions that reveal character. He looked directly at Richard, his gaze unwavering. "And today, Mr. Collins, you showed your true character." Richard's lips trembled as he tried to form an excuse. I didn't know. I thought." James raised his hand, silencing him. "That's the problem. You didn't care to know. You never looked past the uniform. You judged me by my job title, not by the person I am. True leadership isn't measured by wealth or power. It's measured by respect, humility, and how you treat others." The investors exchanged thoughtful glances, nodding subtly. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a stern voice, spoke up. "Mr. Harrington, you're right. We've always believed that a company reflects its leadership. If the CEO disrespects even his janitor, then he disrespects the very foundation of his workforce. This company needs integrity, not arrogance." Richard panicked. His palms grew sweaty as he tried to save himself. "Please listen, I was under pressure, I didn't mean to." But James didn't flinch. His tone remained calm, but each word carried the weight of finality. "Richard Collins, as of this moment you are relieved of your duties as CEO. Consider this your last day in this company." The boardroom erupted in applause. Investors clapped in support. Employees outside burst into cheers, some even hugging each other in relief. For years they had suffered under Richard's cruel leadership, and now justice had arrived. Richard stood frozen, his mouth dry, his mind blank. The man who had ruled with fear was now powerless. His empire crumbled in seconds, not because of a rival, not because of financial loss, but because he underestimated the one person he thought least important. James turned away from Richard and faced the employees. His voice was steady, but warm. "Let this moment be a reminder to us all. Every role matters, whether you are a janitor, a secretary, or a CEO. Success is built on respect. Never look down on anyone, because you never know who they truly are, or what they may become." The room was filled with pride. Employees stood taller, investors smiled with renewed faith, and the entire company felt alive again. Under James's leadership, things began to change. He implemented policies that valued workers at every level. He listened to voices that had been ignored for years. And slowly, the company grew stronger, not just financially, but as a family. As for Richard, he vanished from the corporate world. His name, once feared, became a cautionary tale. He wasn't remembered for his wealth or success. He was remembered for the day he humiliated a janitor, only to discover that Janitor was the true owner of the company. And so, the arrogant CEO who thought he was untouchable was humbled in front of his entire company by the man he once dismissed as just a janitor. James proved that true power doesn't come from titles or wealth. It comes from respect, integrity, and humility. Remember this: the person you underestimate today might be the very person who controls your future tomorrow. If this story shocked you, then trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. I have more unbelievable stories that will leave you speechless. So before you scroll away, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, because the next story might just change the way you look at people forever.